Hello, man. Welcome to the show, assholes. Late night GEO talk. So what up with it? We're talking. So where do we pick off? Hold on. Where did we pick off from last night? Well, we're gonna talk about tonight. We're gonna talk about the Bretton Woods. So I've been doing a little research. Okay. First off, we're going to talk about the dollar. It's October 25th. 2 weeks till midterms. Subscribe. If you like this video, subscribe. We're going to be covering all kinds of cool topics. Right now we're talking about the if you're new to the show, we're talking about the petrodollar, which we're probably going to do like 10 episodes specifically on this topic. So we're talking about and this is basically for beginners. If you're an expert, you probably already know all this stuff. So let's talk about the USD, United States dollar. Now, before you guys start getting all worried about, the petrodollar and it crashing, which apparently countries are doing a de-dollarization. They don't want to use it, which is fine. The problem here it comes with that they peg, and they know damn well they do this. They peg their currencies to the dollar. So, obviously they're exporters. And to be competitive, their exports got to be cheap. If they didn't peg to the dollar, which means a strong dollar, their currency would increase in value, and their exports would be more expensive. Matter of fact, I'm going to give you some exact figures here. There is, other than the U.S., there's about 10 other countries that officially use the dollar. And there's 13, the U.S. has 13 territories. Now there's 36 countries that unofficially use the dollar. Prominent ones, mostly South America, Central America, Middle East, Australia, Africa, a lot of countries, China, they do, but let's see, that's more treasuries. So that's the dollar. Now I had some more. Let me give you the exact number of how many peg. 27 countries currently peg, and the Hong Kong dollar. So that's what I meant. China. They don't officially peg. The 27. They're the ones that officially peg. That don't have a problem saying it. They're like, yes, we do. We peg. But unofficially, you can throw China in there, and they know it. So now let's talk about Bretton Woods. Last night I said it was in France. Well, that's not true. Matter of fact, right now I'd like you guys to go to Wikipedia and go to Bretton Woods system. We're gonna talk about a few things. Okay, this is a real interesting fact. Okay, so this was This was pre 1945, which would be the end of World War II. So they already were planning, because at that point they met in 1944 in New Hampshire. So it wasn't in France. Obviously, France at that point was still under German control. Okay, so I think you had now the Allies during World War II actually consisted of 44 Allied nations. So it's 44. 730 delegates from those 44 Allied nations met, basically to discuss how to rebuild the world's economic system. Because during the war, all trade breaks down and countries go independent, and then look for allies to trade with. So all of Europe was destroyed. This was basically Reconstruction. So this is probably okay. So that was the Bretton Woods. That was the reason for it. Now, this is hashtag number 1. This name I'm about to read to you, and this surpasses a Big Dog POTUS as hashtag number 1. This is what really, other than God, this is what runs the planet. Okay, you ready? Hashtag number 1. Ding, ding, ding. Gold. Haha. Yes, it is gold. So that's what's interesting about the Bretton Woods, because now, real quick, let me go look up. No, actually, it was on that same page. I just know it off my memory. We had 25,000 tons with a T of gold. How did we ended up like that? From geographical advantage of the Western Hemisphere, we were lucky that we didn't sustain the massive carpet bombing that of the cities that Europe and Asia sustained. So our industries were intact. Also, basically, Hitler and the Third Reich, Nazi Germany, the Wehrmacht, or whatever you want to call it. I just call it the Axis powers. Just say Germany. You don't have to call it Nazi. You could say that if you want, but just say Nazi Germany or just Germany. During WW2, they basically hit up every central bank that they conquered. So they took France's gold deposits, the Netherlands' gold deposits, Norway's gold deposits, Poland's, etc., etc. You guys get the point. So basically they consolidated all the gold. We were lucky enough to liberate Western Europe and seized most of the gold. The Soviets got some, it's kind of like a mad dash for the gold. The Nazis probably smuggled a lot of it out probably to Antarctica. I guess that's where I don't know a whole lot about that whole story, because I thought it was more of like a conspiracy theory. And that's just basic. I mean, that's just like from a like a common sense perspective. You would think that I mean, if you compare it to every other war, usually the top commander, doesn't get out like Hitler did. So it's natural to think that whatever the narrative back then that they had, they they probably didn't know till later, maybe 5 years later. I guess it was pretty clever of Hitler and his team to do that. Oh, you know what, too, though? I was thinking, I was really thinking about that. That shows his character. Even at the very end, he still was a coward because, and the reason I say that because he was ordering all his generals to not fall back, to hold fast to the end, and to commit suicide. That was like a real popular thing in Germany during that time. It was like an honor thing. But that was all influence of Hitler. I mean, if he would have just listened to his commanders, there's a good chance. And I'm getting way off the subject here. I have a tendency to do that. No, if he had just listened to his commanders, there's a strong chance that Germany could have took the Allies to an armistice or a treaty, a surrender treaty. The Allies wouldn't have surrendered. It would have just been like an end of the war agreement. So that's how we got all the gold, anyway. So I want you to remember that. So that's going to be interesting. Oh, so let's go back to let's keep it at the Bretton Woods. Okay. So what was their plan? So they got all this gold, right? Well, what would you do? You'd probably want to capitalize, so you'd just create some banks. And you're going to loan. Every bank, I guess, essentially makes their money off like an interest rate at its simplest form. So, okay, this is interesting. They created, boom, the IMF. The IMF. Now we're gonna have to put these guys. We're gonna have to write them down because we're trying to identify globalists. Which I'm not saying that. We use like examples. We use names to identify. For the longest time, or basically the NWO or New World Order, which I guess that's a slang, because for the longest time we couldn't identify these people, so we had to name them ourselves, which we just called the New World Order. But you could probably add, which is probably a collection of factions, but you could probably put the IMF on the list. So the IMF, they're located in Washington, D.C., too, by the way. Now, who created it? Okay, so the IMF was, well, it was the brainchild of these two people here, Harry Dexter White and John Maynard Keynes. So basically, it's like a fund. I guess that's why they call it the fund, International Monetary Fund. So it's from what I understand, it's a collection of like 189 countries. This is interesting. The IMF has a branch called the surveillance of the global economy. So if you wanted to keep track of the global economy, uh, from what I understand, it looks like it's been taken over by the BRIC nations, I think. But here's another thing about the IMF, which is interesting. It's if you're talking about straight globalization, which I'm not talking like these guys are straight villains, but they're it's not a philosophy. The concept is good. It's just the fact that the leaders are evil. I mean, if they weren't evil, it probably wouldn't be that. It's too totalitarian. Even if it's a company or a bank. So, yeah, most every country in the world is a member. So it's some kind of group. I don't know how much power they wield, because you could have all the members and it could be completely powerless group, like the United Nations. They would get mopped up in like 2 minutes flat if they ever tried to go up against the U.S. So I don't even. They're like a paper tiger. Okay, so as far as like members, most of them are BRIC nations. But this is interesting fact here. There's a thing called yeah, okay. So they vote, right? Well, we have what they call a quota. I guess they get points or something. We have the most, so we have the strongest, and then Japan second. So as far as the Western nations, uh, we have the most influence in the IMF. Now, how much are they holding? Like, supposedly anyway. What's in the coffers? Is what we're trying to find out. Basically, about 700 billion. So, we could always say, hey, I don't know what kind of effect that have on the markets, but it's a card we could play. Say, hey, we want $100 billion to construct. I don't know. What's that technology? Evacuated tube technology. Yeah, $100 billion could pay for that project, and then it would increase freight and logistics, production, interstate commerce, because it'd be faster. So there you go. 50, probably won't even about 100 billion. Say, hey, we want 50 billion. And then all the trickle down effects of the supply side economics, all that. But that's just messing around. I don't think they would do that, but be fun to try anyway. Okay, so we're almost about to wrap it up. Just wanted to give you a few things about tonight's episode. It wasn't just the IMF too, by the way. And tomorrow night we're going to be talking about gold. And so as the show goes into the 50s, 60s, 70s, and the 80s, the 90s, or whatever, to where we are today, you'll see the evolution. What I always say, it's all about the petrodollar. That if you study the petrodollar, you can just about branch off to most of everything. Yeah, well, they also, so before we conclude, before we go into gold, they created they created three things at the Bretton Woods: the International Monetary Fund, which is the IMF. They also decided upon an international monetary system, which I believe was an agreement to have gold priced at $35 an ounce. I think that's just off memory, but I don't. They also They created another bank called the International Bank for, and we'll talk about that, for Reconstruction and Development. Now that was the whole thing to rebuild all the other countries, the war-torn countries. Interesting thing before we leave. Interesting little fact. Russia was invited. They did go. They did attend, and from their perspective, which this is interesting. If I can find it. They said they declined to join, and they said that it was all it was is an extension of Wall Street. That's what they said. So interesting. That's your first births of the Cold War. Remember the 2 episodes ago I talked about the concept of, and these are just names. So if you get offended, whatever, I don't care. First world, the West. Second, the East. Third, everyone else. And that just means the rest of the nations. The West would be the Allies. The East being the Soviets. And everyone else independent. So, but since the West and East were the most powerful, everyone that was independent, their resources were heavily... Both West and East aggressively pursued those resources with probably the IMF. All right, so I think we're about to end it. Just want to let you guys know I appreciate you tuning in. Do me a favor, if you like what you hear, if you got anything from it, go ahead and subscribe. And like the video.